Elvis Nation, get ready to lose it because the king is hitting the big screen like never before with epic Elvis Presley in concert.
After 5 decades, the world was given a chance to witness what no one thought possible: an AI scan of Elvis Presley's final resting place. The king of rock and roll, known for his timeless voice and electrifying presence, passed away in 1977. But rumors and speculations about his death and what may lie beneath his casket have haunted fans for years. Could the truth have been hidden all along? For 51 years, his gravesite remained a place of mystery, with few daring to ask the question, what's inside? What if technology, specifically AI, could reveal what we've all been waiting for? A newly revealed video promises just that: an AI scan of Elvis Presley's casket. In the next moments, you'll see exactly what the scan uncovered. But the truth might not be what we expect. Long before AI could scan caskets, there was Elvis Presley. But how much of his life and death was buried in secrecy? Elvis Presley's life was a whirlwind of fame, fortune, and controversy. He redefined music, rock and roll, and the very essence of stardom. His rise from humble beginnings to global superstardom in the 1950s seemed like the ultimate success story. But as the years wore on, Elvis struggled with the pressures of fame, weight gain, prescription drug dependency, and a changing music landscape that left him clinging to the past. In August 1977, Elvis Presley passed away at just 42. His death officially ruled as a heart attack. But the world struggled to come to terms with the loss of the king. Fans and conspiracy theorists alike soon filled the void left by his passing. Some believed that Elvis faked his death, while others claimed there was a darker, more sinister reason behind his sudden death. Perhaps even murder. Despite the speculation, no one had concrete answers. The world was left in the dark, and those who dared to dig deeper were met with silence. In the years following his death, another question began to surface. What about his tomb? Graceland became a pilgrimage site, but few questioned whether the body beneath the casket truly belonged to the king. The tomb itself was kept under lock and key, with few seeing the inside. Some believed it was merely a symbolic resting place. Others thought Elvis's body might not have even been there at all, or that something else had been buried with him. The rumors lingered, but there was little evidence to support them. It wasn't until the arrival of advanced technology that the mystery took a new turn. The AI scan of Elvis's casket became a game-changer. For the first time, scientists had the ability to look beyond the tombstone without disturbing the grave. Could this AI technology unlock answers to questions that had remained unanswered for decades? This wasn't just about a body in a casket. It was about uncovering the secrets that had been kept hidden for 51 years. Was Elvis truly buried in Graceland? And what might be lying in that tomb, concealed from the world? The first scans began, and what they revealed was something no one expected. Artificial intelligence is changing the world in ways we could have never predicted. From diagnosing diseases to creating art, AI's potential is only just beginning to be explored. Now, this groundbreaking technology was used to scan a 51-year-old tomb. Using a method called terahertz imaging, the AI sends waves into the casket, analyzing the objects inside without disturbing the grave. The beauty of this technology lies in its non-invasive nature. No need to disturb the sacred resting place of a legend. The waves penetrate the materials and bounce back, revealing hidden details in the process. No one knew how much data the AI could retrieve, or what it could reveal about the remains of one of the most famous figures in history. As the scan began, scientists were unsure of what to expect. The tomb had remained untouched for over 5 decades. Would the AI provide any meaningful insights? Or would it merely confirm what was already assumed? What if the scan exposed something unexpected, something that no one had even considered? The anticipation was palpable. No matter how advanced technology gets, there are always unknowns. The first images started to appear on the screen, ghostly outlines emerging from the darkness. The grave that had been sealed for over 50 years now lay open to the eyes of modern technology. The images started as vague shapes, but as the AI refined its analysis, the details began to sharpen. At first, it seemed like a normal coffin, but was that really all? As the AI deepened its scan, the answers began to materialize. What appeared to be an ordinary casket now presented unfamiliar features, anomalies that challenged what had been known. Could this discovery shift the entire narrative around Elvis Presley's final resting place? Was there more to his death than the world had ever imagined? The more the AI revealed, the more questions arose. What was really inside that tomb? The AI's deeper scan presented an anomaly. The expected outlines of Elvis Presley's body did not match what was anticipated. What appeared at first to be a clear image of a man in repose began to fragment into unfamiliar shapes. A new object, hidden for decades, began to appear beside the body. Could it be a coffin within a coffin, or something else entirely? As the scan went on, strange inconsistencies emerged. The images didn't line up with what the public had been told for years. The first sign of an issue came when the AI picked up an odd shape beside the body. It was large, long, and wrapped in what appeared to be fabric, but it didn't seem to fit with the idea of a traditional burial. Was it possible that something else had been placed in the grave? Perhaps another object, or even another body, hidden away for reasons no one could explain? The AI continued its work, drawing new, clearer outlines. The body of Elvis was still faintly visible, but the hidden object beside him remained a mystery. What if this was evidence of a cover-up? Was someone trying to hide the truth from the public? Or was this simply an artifact of the burial process? Something that had been placed there decades ago, with no sinister motive behind it. As the scan went deeper into the casket, more questions piled up. What did this strange shape mean? Was it possible that the casket had been tampered with over the years? Had someone, perhaps a close confidant or family member, hidden something of value alongside Elvis? The closer the AI got to the truth, the more unsettling the discovery became. It was clear that what lay beneath the tombstone wasn't exactly what everyone had assumed. The deeper the AI scan went, the more unsettling the discoveries became. The strange object beside Elvis wasn't just a random item. It was something far more deliberate. As the scans continued, the outlines of the hidden object became clearer. It wasn't just any artifact. It appeared to be a large, sealed compartment placed inside the casket. The precise nature of this compartment was still unclear, but one thing was certain. It wasn't part of a typical burial process. It was something intentionally hidden. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Why would such a compartment exist? Could it have been placed there to hide something of significance? Was Elvis buried with something, or someone, concealed away from the public eye? The AI scan revealed even more. Within the compartment, there were what appeared to be folded materials, perhaps documents or items wrapped in cloth. But why were they hidden so carefully? What could have been so important that it required being placed beside him, possibly to protect it from the prying eyes of the world? Why was Elvis's casket not just a place of rest, but now seemingly a vault containing something more? As the AI's work continued, the images became sharper, more detailed, revealing even more about the compartment's contents. The folded materials inside it did not appear to be ordinary. They seemed to be deliberately placed with care, like something meant to be preserved for a future generation. Was it a message from someone close to Elvis, left behind in secret? Could it have been a letter, a journal, or even a record of something crucial about Elvis's life, death, or legacy that had never been revealed? The possibilities seemed endless. The first question that arose was whether the compartment had been added recently or if it had been there since the original burial. If it had been placed there recently, who could have done it and why? Was there an effort to obscure some aspect of Elvis's life or death, perhaps to protect the legacy of the king? Or was this just another piece of the puzzle, a forgotten part of a legend that was never meant to be revealed? It was clear that the AI scan wasn't just uncovering a typical burial. It was revealing a history that had been deliberately concealed. This wasn't a simple casket. It was an enigma, one that had been carefully preserved for decades, hidden from the world's gaze. And now, after all these years, the technology had finally given the world a glimpse of what had been kept in the shadows. But what was inside that compartment? The truth was so close now, closer than it had ever been. The world could finally know. The answer lay within the sealed materials, but as the AI scans progressed, they only raised more questions. The world was left wondering, what did Elvis's casket truly contain? And why was it kept secret for so long? The discovery sent shockwaves through the world, and the implications were immediately felt. What could this compartment mean? For decades, the story of Elvis Presley's death and burial had been set in stone, until now. The AI scan had unlocked something that no one could have predicted, revealing that the casket held more than just a body. And it wasn't just an ordinary discovery. It was a key to a hidden narrative, a missing chapter of the king's life that was deliberately obscured for years. What could be inside this compartment? The speculation grew with each passing minute. The world held its breath as the contents of the compartment were revealed. Inside, carefully folded and sealed in cloth, were papers, old yellowed documents that looked ancient yet surprisingly intact. It was clear that whatever was in the casket wasn't just memorabilia. It was something of much greater importance, something that had been intentionally placed there. But what did these papers say? Were they notes from Elvis himself, perhaps a final message to his fans? Or were they something more sinister? An account of something kept hidden, a secret that could shake the foundations of Elvis's legacy. As the documents were scanned, a chilling realization began to set in. The papers contained writing, a handwriting that wasn't Elvis's own. It was a letter, dated shortly before his death, from someone close to him, but not his family. The letter described feelings of guilt, secrecy, and the burden of keeping a monumental secret. The more the AI revealed, the clearer it became. Elvis Presley's death, his legacy, and everything that had been told about his passing was now called into question. The letter made cryptic references to a hidden truth that had to be kept quiet for the sake of the king's image. It spoke of powerful people, of decisions made behind closed doors, and of a reality that was buried alongside Elvis. And that wasn't all. The letter hinted at another body, someone who had been part of the mystery surrounding his death. This wasn't just a confession, It was a revelation that completely upended the story of Elvis Presley's final days. The world now had a glimpse into a world of deception, of cover-ups, and of the lengths people went to in order to maintain an image at all costs. The truth about Elvis Presley's death and his final resting place was no longer just a conspiracy. It was a reality that had been buried, literally and figuratively, for over 50 years. And now, as the documents continued to be revealed, it was clear that the world had been living with a lie. The world wasn't ready for the truth. And perhaps, just perhaps, the secret was never meant to come out at all. As the letter continued to unfold, the true weight of what was being revealed began to sink in. The implications were immense, far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The writing, though cryptic, began to paint a picture of a reality that had been kept from the world for decades. This wasn't just a celebrity death. This was a calculated effort to control a narrative, to protect the image of Elvis Presley, and to hide a deeply personal truth that had been buried with him. The mention of another body was particularly chilling. What did this mean? Was there someone else involved in Elvis's death? Or was this a body that had been replaced to divert attention from the truth? The letter hinted at a cover-up, a deliberate attempt to make the public believe one story while hiding the real events behind closed doors. The fact that it had been placed in Elvis's casket, alongside his remains, suggested that whoever wrote it felt the need to confess, to reveal something that had been kept hidden for far too long. But why now? Why had this message remained sealed for so many years, only to be discovered through the lens of AI technology? It became clear that the document wasn't just a letter. It was a confession, a piece of the puzzle that explained why Elvis Presley's death had never fully made sense. This was no longer just about rumors or conspiracy theories. The AI scan had uncovered proof that Elvis's passing was far more complicated than anyone had ever believed. And what's more, the letter didn't just point to a singular event. It referenced a series of decisions, events, and actions that were meant to control the legacy of the king. It mentioned powerful forces who had ensured that the true story would never come to light, no matter the cost. The AI had uncovered a hidden truth, and it was slowly unraveling a web of secrets that had been carefully constructed for over 5 decades. The world's perception of Elvis Presley had been shaped by stories, by media, by a carefully curated image that was meant to preserve the king's legacy. But what if that image was built on a foundation of lies? And what if the truth, Elvis's real story, was far darker than anyone had ever imagined? As the world began to process the magnitude of this revelation, the consequences were immediate and profound. The media, fans, and historians alike scrambled to make sense of the new reality that had been unearthed from Elvis Presley's casket. For decades, the king of rock and roll had been presented to the world as a flawless icon, his legacy cemented in history. But now, that carefully constructed image was being questioned, piece by piece. The documents revealed not only a hidden truth about Elvis's final days, but also a larger, more disturbing narrative about how the public's perception of him had been shaped. The letter spoke of powerful figures who had been involved in crafting the king's image and controlling the narrative surrounding his death. These were not just industry professionals. They were individuals who had a vested interest in keeping the truth from ever surfacing. What had Elvis known? And why had he allowed such a carefully guarded lie to persist? Was it fear of what the truth could do to his legacy? Or had he been complicit in the cover-up all along? The letter also hinted at the presence of another individual, someone whose connection to Elvis had never been acknowledged publicly. This person, possibly even more central to the events surrounding Elvis's death than anyone had ever known, had been kept hidden from the public eye. The name was never revealed, but the implications were clear. There was someone out there who knew everything about what really happened, and they had been silenced. The question that now loomed large was whether Elvis's family or inner circle had been aware of this hidden compartment and its contents. Had they known what was inside all along? Or was this a discovery that no one had anticipated? The documents didn't just raise questions. They raised suspicions about who might have been involved in hiding the truth and why they had gone to such great lengths. As this new chapter of Elvis Presley's life and death was revealed, the world was left to grapple with the reality that their perception of the king had been built on something far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The truth about his death, buried for decades, was now in the open, and with it came the burden of reckoning with the dark secrets of the past. But there was still one final question that needed answering. Who was responsible for the cover-up, and why? As the documents continued to be analyzed, the reality of what had been concealed for so long started to take shape. The more the world learned about the hidden compartment, the deeper the questions grew. The AI scan had uncovered not just one mystery, but an entire web of secrets tied to Elvis Presley's death. Secrets that went beyond conspiracy theories and into the realm of undeniable truth. Elvis, once an untouchable legend, was now being revealed as a man who had been buried with a truth too dangerous to tell. The legacy of Elvis Presley, shaped by decades of adoration and myth, was now threatened by the very people who had once worked to protect it. There was a stark realization. Elvis's death wasn't the final chapter. It was the beginning of an even bigger story, one that had remained locked away in a casket for over 50 years. What could this mean for the millions of fans who had spent decades idolizing him, who had built their own version of Elvis based on the stories and the image that the media had sold them? How would they react when the truth finally broke free from the darkness? This revelation was not just a scandal, it was a reckoning for the public's understanding of one of the world's most iconic figures. The letter that had been found in the casket now sat at the center of the storm, its cryptic words challenging everything fans and historians thought they knew about Elvis. It suggested that he had not been the victim of a singular tragic moment, but instead a man who had been caught in a complex web of power, secrecy, and manipulation. He had been a pawn in a game far larger than himself, one played by people who had the means and the motive to control his death and his legacy. And the more the letter was decoded, the more it became clear that the truth wasn't just about Elvis Presley. It was about the system that had built him up and then buried him. As the world tried to digest this, there was another layer to this discovery that continued to ripple outward. The hidden compartment in Elvis's casket wasn't the only secret being uncovered. The AI scans hinted at a vast network of connections, some of which had been entirely ignored or erased from history. In the years following Elvis's death, many of the people closest to him had vanished from the public eye. What if they had been silenced because of what they knew? What if they were part of the conspiracy to keep the truth hidden? With each new piece of information revealed, the stakes got higher. The world had been living with an illusion for half a century. And now, that illusion was crumbling. What was left in the wake of the AI scan wasn't just the story of Elvis Presley's death. It was the story of the people who built the myth and did everything in their power to preserve it, even at the cost of truth. As the world grappled with the revelations from the AI scan, The true impact of these discoveries began to unfold. What had started as an intriguing investigation into the king's final resting place had turned into a global reckoning. The image of Elvis Presley that had been carefully crafted by the media, his family, and his inner circle for decades was now shattered. His legacy, once untouchable, was being redefined. Fans and critics alike were forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the king of rock and roll. What had been revealed from the AI scan was more than just a hidden compartment. It was an entire narrative of manipulation, secrecy, and hidden truths. The letter found in the casket spoke of the efforts to protect Elvis's image at all costs, of the powerful figures behind the scenes who had shaped the world's perception of him. For years, the truth had been locked away, buried with Elvis. But now, with the AI technology unveiling what had been concealed, the world had to face the consequences of this long-buried secret. Elvis Presley had always been a symbol of greatness. But he was also a man, one who struggled with his own demons and was caught in a system that used him as a pawn in a much larger game. The truth about his death, his final days, and the conspiracy surrounding his casket was something the world hadn't been ready for. But now, there was no turning back. The AI scan had exposed the dark underbelly of the Elvis myth, forcing the world to confront not just the man, but the legacy that had been crafted around him. This was no longer just a story about a rock legend. It was a cautionary tale about the lengths people will go to in order to protect the stories they tell. As the final pieces of the puzzle were revealed, there was an undeniable sense of closure, but also a deep sense of loss. The Elvis the world had known, untouchable, immortal, was gone. In his place, a new understanding of the king began to emerge, one that was more complex, more human, and ultimately more tragic than anyone could have anticipated. His legacy would live on in the music, in the memories, and in the story of a man who was more than just a legend. But the truth, once buried beneath layers of secrecy, was now out in the open. And with it came the knowledge that Elvis Presley, the king, had never truly been free. The world would never look at Elvis Presley the same way again. For decades, his story had been shaped by the people around him, by those who had controlled the narrative of his life and death. But with the truth now exposed, the king's legacy had been irrevocably altered. What had once been a flawless image of a rock and roll icon was now marred by secrets, cover-ups, and hidden truths. The AI scan had pulled back the curtain on a story that was far more complicated than anyone had ever known. Fans, critics, and historians who had admired Elvis from afar were now forced to reconcile the man they'd idolized with the complex, deeply troubled figure revealed in the documents. The truth wasn't just a revelation about Elvis's death. It was about the system that had built him, the people who had benefited from his fame, and the lengths they had gone to in order to keep the real story hidden. The letter found in the casket, once thought to be a mere curiosity, had proved to be a confession, a piece of history that explained the cover-up of Elvis's death, the manipulation of his image, and the deliberate silencing of those who might have told the truth. The letter's mention of a hidden body, a second life, hinted at a deeper conspiracy that went far beyond a celebrity death.
It was like waking up from a nightmare and hoping to wake up from a nightmare and saying, this is a joke. And I broke down and I couldn't believe it.
The studio lights felt warm on her face, almost too warm. Priscilla Presley sat across from the interviewer, her posture perfect as always, that practiced smile in place. At 78 years old, she had done thousands of interviews about Elvis. She knew how to handle the questions, the memories, the inevitable tears from fans who still mourned him. But when the producer handed her the photograph, something changed. Her hands started trembling. The color drained from her carefully made-up face. And then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times online, she whispered 5 words that stopped everyone in the room cold. "That's not Elvis in there." What was in that photograph? Why did it shake Priscilla so deeply that she nearly collapsed? And what does this reveal about the man the world thought they knew? To understand what happened in that studio, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time when Priscilla was just a girl and Elvis was already becoming a god. Priscilla Ann Wagner was 14 years old when she first saw Elvis Presley. The year was 1959, and she was living in Wiesbaden, Germany, where her stepfather, an Air Force officer, had been stationed. Elvis was there too, drafted into the army, trying to be a regular soldier despite being the most famous entertainer in the world. A mutual friend arranged for them to meet at Elvis's rented house off base. Priscilla wore a navy and white sailor dress. Her dark hair was styled high, making her look older than her years, though not by much. Elvis was 24. She was 14. Even by 1959 standards, it raised eyebrows. But Elvis wasn't interested in her the way people assumed, not at first. He was lonely in Germany, grieving his mother Gladys, who had died just months before. What he wanted was someone to talk to, someone who didn't want anything from him, someone who reminded him of simpler times. Priscilla became that person. They would sit for hours in his living room, Elvis at the piano, playing gospel songs while she listened. He told her about his mother, about his fears that his career might be over, about the crushing weight of being Elvis Presley. Their relationship was strange from the start, more father-daughter than romantic, at least in those early years. Elvis controlled everything: what she wore, how she styled her hair, when she could see friends. He was creating something, molding her into his ideal woman. Priscilla, young and sheltered, didn't recognize it as control. She thought it was love. When Elvis returned to America in 1960, Priscilla thought she might never see him again. She cried for days. Her parents tried to comfort her, tried to help her move on. But Elvis called, and called again. And then he invited her to visit Graceland for Christmas. Her parents said no, obviously. Their 14-year-old daughter flying alone to Memphis to stay with a 25-year-old rock star? But Elvis was persuasive. He promised she would stay with his father and stepmother. He promised she would be chaperoned at all times. He promised to take care of her like she was his own daughter. Somehow, impossibly, they agreed. Priscilla boarded a plane to Memphis, and her childhood effectively ended. Life at Graceland was unlike anything she had imagined. The mansion felt alive with people at all hours. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's close circle of friends and bodyguards, filled the rooms with laughter and music and constant motion. Elvis slept during the day and came alive at night. Priscilla adjusted her entire schedule to match his, staying awake until dawn, sleeping through the afternoon. She was still in high school, still living in Germany, but more and more of her life existed in Memphis, in those long nights at Graceland, waiting for Elvis to notice her. By 1962, Priscilla's parents agreed to let her move to Memphis permanently. She was 17. Elvis enrolled her in an all-girls Catholic school, hired tutors, and set her up in a house nearby. She graduated in 1963, and then the real transformation began. Elvis sent her to modeling school to learn how to walk and pose. He brought in a hairstylist who dyed her hair jet black and styled it in a towering beehive. He chose her clothes, her makeup, everything. He was creating his perfect woman, and Priscilla was cooperating because she loved him, because she didn't know any different, because she believed this was what love looked like. But Elvis wouldn't marry her. Year after year passed. Priscilla lived in his house, shared his bed, organized his life, but wore no ring. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was terrified of what marriage might do to Elvis's image. The screaming girls who bought records and concert tickets wanted to believe Elvis was available. A wife would ruin that fantasy. So Priscilla existed in limbo, not quite a girlfriend, not quite a wife, always waiting for Elvis to decide her future. The proposal finally came in 1966. Priscilla was 21, and she had started to pull away. She had her own friends now, her own life separate from Elvis. He could feel her slipping, and it terrified him. On Christmas Eve, he gave her a 3.5-carat diamond ring. They married on May 1st, 1967, in a small ceremony in Las Vegas. 8 minutes long, presided over by a Nevada Supreme Court justice, with only 14 guests present. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Priscilla had dreamed of all those years. It felt rushed, almost like Elvis wanted to get it over with. But she was finally Mrs. Elvis Presley, and that was supposed to fix everything. It didn't fix anything. Marriage revealed what Priscilla had been ignoring for years. Elvis didn't want a partner. He wanted a doll, a possession, something beautiful to display, but never challenge him. The rules got stricter after the wedding, not looser. She couldn't work, couldn't have her own career, couldn't even leave the house without permission. Elvis was often gone, filming movies in Hollywood or performing in Vegas, surrounded by other women. But Priscilla was expected to stay at Graceland, faithful and waiting. 9 months after the wedding, Priscilla gave birth to Lisa Marie Presley on February 1st, 1968. Elvis loved his daughter with an intensity that surprised everyone. He held her for hours, sang to her, called her his little princess. But fatherhood didn't change him. If anything, it made things worse. Elvis started treating Priscilla more like a mother than a wife. He stopped touching her, stopped sleeping in their bedroom. He said he couldn't see her the same way now that she was a mother. Priscilla was 22 years old, married to the most desired man in the world, and utterly alone. The pills were always there, but they got worse after Lisa Marie's birth. Elvis took them to sleep, to wake up, to perform, to numb whatever pain lived inside him. His doctor, George Nicopolis, prescribed them freely. Uppers, downers, painkillers, sleeping pills, a pharmaceutical cocktail that kept Elvis functioning but barely human. Priscilla would find him passed out in the bathroom, slumped over in chairs, mumbling incoherently. She begged him to stop. She flushed pills down the toilet, confronted his doctor, pleaded with his father. Nothing changed. Elvis was disappearing, and she couldn't save him. By 1972, Priscilla couldn't take it anymore. She had met someone, a karate instructor named Mike Stone, who treated her like a person instead of a possession. She told Elvis she was leaving. He didn't believe her at first. No one left Elvis Presley. But Priscilla packed her bags, took Lisa Marie, and moved out of Graceland. The divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973. They had been married for 6 years. Elvis was devastated. He called her constantly, begging her to come back, promising to change. But Priscilla knew better. She loved him, would always love him, but she couldn't live with him. They stayed close after the divorce, closer than many people realized. Priscilla brought Lisa Marie to visit regularly. Elvis called her for advice about business decisions, about his career, about his loneliness. She was still the person who understood him best, who knew both the public Elvis and the private one. And she watched, helpless, as he continued to decline. The performances got worse. He forgot lyrics, stumbled on stage, sweated through his jumpsuits. The weight came and went in dramatic swings. His face looked puffy and distant. The pills never stopped. August 16, 1977. The day every Elvis fan knows by heart. Priscilla got the call in the afternoon. Elvis was dead. Found in his bathroom at Graceland, slumped on the floor, his face against the red shag carpet. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart attack. But everyone knew the real cause: the pills, the prescription drugs that had been slowly killing him for years. Priscilla flew to Memphis immediately, Lisa Marie with her. She had to see him one last time. The funeral was chaos. 50,000 people lined the streets outside Graceland. Fans screamed and fainted and threw themselves against the gates. Inside the mansion, Elvis lay in a copper coffin in the foyer, dressed in a white suit, his face made up to look peaceful. Priscilla stood over him for a long time. She touched his hand, cold and stiff. She whispered things only he would have understood. And then she had to step back and let the world mourn him. This man who belonged to everyone and no one. In the years after his death, Priscilla became the keeper of Elvis's legacy. She took over Graceland when it was drowning in debt and turned it into one of the most visited private homes in America. She fought to protect his image, his music, his memory. She gave interviews, appeared at events, smiled for cameras, and told the same stories over and over. The world loved her for it. She was the devoted ex-wife, the woman who never stopped loving Elvis, even when loving him had nearly destroyed her. But privately, Priscilla carried questions she couldn't answer. Things about Elvis's death that never made sense. The timeline was wrong. His body had been found around 2:30 p.m., but the last time anyone saw him alive was around 9:30 that morning when he went upstairs after playing racquetball. 5 hours. What happened in those 5 hours? Why was his body in such strange condition when they found him? Why did the autopsy results get sealed? Why did so many details get buried? Priscilla heard the conspiracy theories like everyone else. That Elvis faked his death, that he was in witness protection, that he couldn't handle the fame anymore and staged his own disappearance. She dismissed them publicly, called them disrespectful to his memory. But privately, late at night, she wondered. There were moments that didn't fit. Phone calls that came from disconnected numbers. Sightings that seemed too detailed to be fan fantasies. A photograph that surfaced years later showing a man who looked exactly like Elvis boarding a plane to Argentina. She never spoke about these doubts. What would be the point? Elvis was gone, buried at Graceland next to his mother. Lisa Marie needed to grieve properly, to have closure. The fans needed their icon to rest in peace. And Priscilla needed to move forward with her own life. She remarried, had more relationships, built a career separate from Elvis. But the questions stayed with her, quiet and persistent, like a song she couldn't quite remember but couldn't forget. Decades passed. Priscilla became a grandmother. Lisa Marie had her own children, her own struggles with fame and addiction, and the weight of being Elvis's daughter. The world changed around them, but Elvis remained frozen in time, forever 42, forever the king. Graceland stood as a monument to his memory, The jumpsuits were preserved behind glass. The jungle room stayed exactly as he left it. Everything carefully maintained to keep the legend alive. Then came the photograph. A researcher had been going through FBI files, documents related to an old case involving organized crime in the 1970s. Buried in a box of surveillance photos was an image from 1978, a year after Elvis died. It showed a man at a small airport in rural Argentina. The man wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but his profile was unmistakable. The jawline, the curve of his lip, the way he held his shoulders. It looked exactly like Elvis Presley. The photograph circulated online for years. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was proof Elvis had faked his death. Skeptics said it was just a look-alike, or a doctored image, or a case of people seeing what they wanted to see. The FBI never confirmed or denied whether the photo was authentic. The case file it came from remained partially classified. No one could prove anything either way. But the image haunted people who had loved Elvis. That familiar face in an unfamiliar place, living a life no one knew about. Priscilla had seen the photo years ago when it first appeared. She looked at it once, declared it a fake, and refused to discuss it further. She had spent decades protecting Elvis's legacy. She wasn't going to let some grainy airport surveillance photo undo all that work. But the image stayed with her. She found herself thinking about it at odd moments. In dreams, she saw Elvis boarding that plane, disappearing into a new life, free from the fame that had imprisoned him. The interview was supposed to be routine. A major network documentary about Elvis's life, marking the 45th anniversary of his death. Priscilla had agreed to participate, to share memories, to talk about the man behind the legend. She had done it 100 times before. The questions were predictable. How did you meet? What was he really like? Do you still love him? She answered on autopilot, the same polished responses she had given for years. Then the producer pulled out a folder. He said they had obtained something through a Freedom of Information request, a previously classified document from the FBI's files. He wanted to show it to Priscilla to get her reaction on camera. She agreed without thinking much about it. She had seen plenty of FBI documents about Elvis over the years. The government had kept files on him because of his influence, his ability to move crowds, his connections to various people and places. Nothing in those files had ever surprised her. The producer handed her a photograph. At first, Priscilla didn't understand what she was looking at. It was the Argentina airport photo, but not the version that had circulated online. This was a different angle, clearer, showing more detail. And there were other photos with it, a series taken over several minutes, as the man moved through the small terminal. In one image, the sunglasses had slipped down slightly, revealing his eyes. In another, the baseball cap had come off as he bent to pick up a bag. The resemblance wasn't just similar. It was exact. Priscilla's hands started shaking. She brought the photo closer to her face, studying every detail. The interviewer asked her what she saw, if she recognized the person. She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up. Because there was something in those photos that no one else would notice, something only she would know. The man in the airport was wearing a bracelet on his right wrist, a simple leather band with a silver clasp. Elvis had worn an identical bracelet, a gift from his mother that he never took off. He had been wearing it when Priscilla last saw him alive. The room went silent. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for her to say something. Priscilla tried to compose herself, to give the expected response, to dismiss the photos as a cruel hoax. but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "That's not Elvis in there." She meant it wasn't Elvis in the grave at Graceland. It couldn't be. Because if these photos were real, if this evidence was authentic, then Elvis had been alive in 1978, walking through an airport in Argentina, wearing his mother's bracelet, living a life the world knew nothing about. Priscilla stood up too quickly. The room spun. Someone grabbed her arm to steady her, but she pulled away. She needed air, needed space, needed to think. The producer was talking, asking if she was okay, saying they could stop filming. But Priscilla wasn't listening. She was thinking about that morning in 1977, the last time she talked to Elvis on the phone. He had sounded strange, distant, but also excited about something. He said he loved her and Lisa Marie. He said to take care of each other. At the time, she thought it was the pills talking, making him emotional and paranoid. What if it was goodbye? The interview never aired. The network's legal team killed it, too worried about lawsuits and conspiracy theories and the backlash from Elvis's estate. Priscilla signed a non-disclosure agreement, legally prevented from discussing what she saw in those photographs. The producer claimed the FBI photos were returned to the archives, though no one could confirm that. The whole incident disappeared, buried under legal threats and hush money and the weight of protecting a legend that had become bigger than the man himself. Priscilla went back to her life. She attended Elvis events, gave interviews, maintained the carefully constructed narrative of his life and death. But something had broken inside her. The certainty she had carried for decades was gone. She didn't know anymore what was true and what was mythology. Had Elvis died in 1977? Or had he escaped? Was he buried at Graceland? Or was that someone else? Did he choose to leave her and Lisa Marie behind? Or did circumstances force him away? The questions multiplied, and there were no answers, only silence and suspicion. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Priscilla sometimes imagined Elvis alive somewhere, living in a small house by the ocean, far from fame and crowds and the crushing expectations of being the king. She imagined him older now, maybe with gray in his hair, his face lined and weathered, but peaceful in a way it never was during his public life. She imagined him thinking about her sometimes, wondering if she knew the truth, hoping she understood why he had to go. The world still loves Elvis Presley, the legend, the icon, the eternal king of rock and roll.
He was taller than people think.
Oh.
That's for sure.
How tall was he?
He was 6 foot. 6 foot,
Really?
a little more, a little bit.
They said, "Never reveal this." Bob Joyce spoke those words in a small church in Arkansas, his voice trembling slightly as he stood before a congregation that had come to hear him preach, but stayed to hear him finally address the question that has followed him for decades. At 71 years old, Pastor Bob Joyce has spent most of his adult life denying that he is Elvis Presley, living under a new identity. He has insisted, repeatedly and firmly, that he is just Bob Joyce, a man who loves God and happens to have a voice that sounds uncannily like the king of rock and roll. But in recent months, something has changed. Bob has started talking about things he was told never to discuss. Stories about what really happened to Elvis after August 16, 1977, and why so many people connected to the Presley world wanted those stories buried. He has not admitted to being Elvis. He has not claimed to have faked his death. But he has begun speaking about the possibility that the official story of Elvis's final days was incomplete, sanitized, and carefully controlled by people who had reasons to hide the full truth. So who is Bob Joyce? Why do thousands of people believe he is Elvis Presley in disguise? And what is the secret that Bob was told never to reveal about what really happened to the king? Robert Audie Joyce was born on January 21, 1953, in Benton, Arkansas, a small city about 30 miles southwest of Little Rock. Birth records from Saline County confirmed the date and location, listing his parents as working-class residents of the area. His childhood was unremarkable in most ways, at least according to the sparse documentation that exists from that era. He grew up in a religious household where church was not just a Sunday obligation, but a central part of life. His family attended a small Baptist congregation, and it was there that Bob first discovered his love for music. By the time Bob was 8 or 9 years old, he was singing in church choirs, his voice already showing the power and clarity that would later make people stop and listen. He learned to play guitar from family members and church musicians, developing a style that drew from gospel, country, and the rock and roll that was exploding across America in the late 1950s and early 60s. Elvis Presley was one of the biggest influences on young musicians during that time, and Bob was no exception. He listened to Elvis records, studied his phrasing, and learned to sing with the same emotional intensity that made Elvis a star. In the 1970s, while Elvis Presley was performing sold-out shows in Las Vegas, struggling with prescription drug addiction, and watching his health deteriorate year by year, Bob Joyce was living a quiet life in Arkansas. He worked various jobs to support himself, everything from construction to factory work, while pursuing music as a passion rather than a career. He played at local churches, performed at community events, and slowly built a reputation as a talented singer with a voice that reminded people of someone famous. Friends and family members would joke that Bob sounded like Elvis, and Bob would laugh it off. Lots of people sounded like Elvis. The king had influenced an entire generation of singers, and Bob was just one of thousands who had absorbed his style and made it their own. There was nothing unusual about it. Nothing that would suggest Bob was anything other than a talented amateur musician living in small-town Arkansas. In his late 20s, Bob felt a calling to ministry. He attended Bible college, studied theology, and eventually became an ordained Baptist minister. His first pastoral positions were at tiny rural churches where the congregation might number 20 or 30 people on a good Sunday. He preached, led worship, performed marriages and funerals, and lived the kind of modest, service-oriented life that thousands of rural pastors live across America. His salary was minimal, often supplemented by side work or support from his wife, who worked as a teacher. Bob married and started a family, raising children who grew up in parsonages and church fellowship halls. His life revolved around his congregation, his family, and his faith. He was not seeking fame or fortune. He was not trying to build a megachurch or become a televangelist. He was content to serve small communities, to use his musical gifts to lead worship, and to live a life that was about ministry rather than attention. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Bob Joyce pastored churches in Arkansas and occasionally in neighboring states. He developed a following among people who appreciated his preaching style and his musical abilities, but it was always a local following, people who drove from nearby towns to hear him on Sunday mornings. There was no indication that Bob Joyce was anything other than exactly who he claimed to be: a pastor, a musician, a family man dedicated to serving God. And then the internet happened. Sometime in the early 2000s, videos of Bob Joyce singing gospel songs in church started appearing on YouTube. The videos were simple, often shot on low-quality cameras by congregation members who wanted to share their pastor's beautiful voice with friends and family. But when those videos started circulating beyond Bob's immediate community, people noticed something strange. Bob did not just sound like Elvis. He sounded exactly like Elvis. The tone, the phrasing, the vibrato, the way he held certain notes and added subtle flourishes to the melody. It was all eerily familiar to anyone who had ever listened to Elvis Presley. Comments sections exploded. People started comparing Bob's performances to Elvis recordings, analyzing the vocal similarities frame by frame. And then someone noticed the physical resemblance. Bob had the same jawline, the same eye shape, the same general build as Elvis had in his later years. He wore glasses and had graying hair, which made sense if you assumed Elvis had continued aging after 1977. And his mannerisms while singing, the way he moved his hands, the way he tilted his head, the subtle expressions that crossed his face, all bore an uncanny similarity to Elvis Presley. The conspiracy theory took root quickly. Entire websites and YouTube channels were dedicated to proving that Bob Joyce was Elvis Presley living under a new identity. People analyzed voice patterns using audio software, claiming the vocal signatures matched. They studied photographs, creating side-by-side comparisons that highlighted every similarity. They investigated Bob's background, looking for gaps in his documented history that could explain where Elvis had been hiding for decades. The theory went like this: Elvis Presley, exhausted from fame, drowning in debt, and possibly facing threats from organized crime figures he had connections to, faked his own death on August 16, 1977. With the help of a few trusted confidants, he staged the scene at Graceland, used a body double in the casket, and disappeared into a new life as Bob Joyce, a humble pastor in Arkansas where no one would think to look for the king of rock and roll. Believers pointed to supposed evidence, the fact that Elvis's casket was unusually heavy, suggesting it might have contained something other than a body. The oddities in the official autopsy report, which had inconsistencies that raised questions about whether the body examined was actually Elvis. The speed with which he was buried, less than 2 days after his death, which some claimed was suspiciously fast. And the fact that several people close to Elvis had hinted over the years that the official story did not tell the whole truth. Bob Joyce, for his part, has consistently denied being Elvis Presley. In interviews and public statements, he has said that he is just a pastor who happens to sound like Elvis, that the resemblance is coincidental, and that people are seeing patterns that do not actually exist. He has expressed frustration with the constant questions, the invasion of his privacy, and the way the conspiracy theory has overshadowed his ministry. But denials have not stopped the speculation. In fact, they have fueled it. Believers argue that of course Bob would deny being Elvis. If he admitted the truth, the entire purpose of faking his death would be defeated. The denials, they claim, are part of the cover story, a necessary performance to maintain the illusion. And then Bob started saying things that made people wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story than he had been willing to admit. In sermons over the past few years, Bob has referenced secrets, burdens he has carried, and truths that people have told him never to reveal. He has spoken about how the world often accepts sanitized versions of history without questioning what might have been left out. And he has hinted, in vague and carefully worded ways, that the official narrative surrounding Elvis Presley's death may not capture the full complexity of what actually happened. In one sermon that circulated widely online, Bob talked about redemption and second chances. He said that God sometimes gives people opportunities to start over, to leave behind the mistakes and pressures of their past, and build a new life focused on faith and service. He spoke about how fame can be a prison, how wealth can be a burden, and how sometimes the only way to find peace is to disappear from the world that knows your name. People who believe Bob is Elvis saw this as confirmation. People who think he is just a pastor saw it as a thoughtful reflection on biblical themes. But either way, the sermon added fuel to the fire. The theory about Elvis faking his death is not new, and it did not originate with Bob Joyce. It has existed in various forms since 1977, with different versions emphasizing different motives and methods. Understanding these theories is essential to understanding why Bob Joyce became such a focal point for believers. Some versions focus on financial problems. Elvis was reportedly millions of dollars in debt at the time of his death, despite earning enormous sums throughout his career. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had negotiated deals that heavily favored himself over Elvis, taking 50% of Elvis's earnings and making financial decisions that left the king with less money than anyone realized. Elvis owed significant back taxes to the IRS. He had expensive habits, including his tendency to buy cars, jewelry, and houses on impulse, and give them away to friends, family, and strangers. And he was supporting a large entourage of people who depended on him for their livelihoods. The financial pressure was intense, and some theorists believe that faking his death allowed Elvis to escape those obligations. If he was legally dead, his debts would become the estate's problem. He would no longer be responsible for supporting dozens of people, and he could start over with whatever money he had managed to hide away before his alleged death. Other versions of the theory emphasize threats from organized crime. Elvis had connections to law enforcement that went back to the early 1970s. He had met with President Richard Nixon in 1970 and received an honorary DEA badge, which he took seriously despite his own drug use. Elvis had allegedly helped the FBI with investigations into organized crime figures, providing information about drug trafficking and mob activities that he learned about through his connections in the entertainment industry. Some conspiracy theorists believe that those connections made Elvis a target. They point to the fact that several people connected to Elvis died under suspicious circumstances in the years following his death. They reference threats that Elvis allegedly received, warnings from people who told him to stay out of certain business dealings or face consequences. And they suggest that faking his death was the only way to protect himself and his family from retaliation by people who saw him as a liability or a threat. There are also stories about Elvis's involvement with the Fraternal Order of Police and other law enforcement organizations. Elvis collected badges and honorary titles from police departments across the country. And some believers argue that these connections gave him access to resources that could have helped him fake his death. Police officers who could falsify documents, coroners who could manipulate autopsy reports, government officials who could create a new identity complete with social security number, birth certificate, and background documentation. The idea sounds far-fetched until you consider how much power and influence Elvis actually had in 1977. He was one of the most famous people in the world. He had relationships with politicians, law enforcement officials, and powerful figures in the entertainment industry. And he had loyal associates who would have done almost anything to help him if he asked. Still, other versions focus on exhaustion and burnout, and these might be the most psychologically credible. Elvis was performing constantly in the months before his death, despite being in terrible physical condition. He was overweight, addicted to prescription medications, suffering from glaucoma, high blood pressure, an enlarged colon, and liver damage. His doctor, George Nicopolis, was prescribing him massive quantities of drugs to keep him functioning, to help him sleep, to wake him up, to manage pain, to control his moods. Elvis was trapped in a cycle that was literally killing him. He needed to perform to pay his bills and support his entourage. But performing required drugs to function, and the drugs were destroying his body. He was aware of it. Friends who visited him in his final months described a man who seemed deeply depressed, who talked about being tired of the constant demands, and who expressed a desire to just disappear and live a normal life away from the spotlight. In this version of the theory, Elvis made a rational decision that faking his death was preferable to dying slowly on stage. He chose to stage his death, disappear, and start over as someone else, someone who could live without the crushing weight of being Elvis Presley. The question then becomes, could someone as famous as Elvis actually pull off such a deception? And if he did, what would his new life look like? He would need to choose a life that was as different from his previous existence as possible. No performing on big stages, no seeking fame or fortune, no returning to Memphis or Las Vegas or any place where he might be recognized. He would need to become someone completely ordinary, someone who would never attract the kind of attention that could blow. His cover. A pastor in rural Arkansas fits that profile almost perfectly. It is a life of service rather than celebrity. It keeps you connected to music without putting you on national stages. It gives you a community without exposing you to millions of people. And it provides a legitimate reason to stay out of the spotlight while still having a public presence in small, controlled environments where people know you as Bob Joyce, not as a celebrity or a mystery. The official story is straightforward, but the details surrounding August 16, 1977, deserve closer examination. On that morning, Elvis was scheduled to fly to Portland, Maine, to begin another concert tour. He had been up most of the night, unable to sleep, a pattern that had become common in his final months. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, was with him at Graceland, and according to her account, Elvis went into the bathroom around 9 in the morning and never came out. When Ginger woke up around 1:30 in the afternoon, she found Elvis unresponsive on the bathroom floor. He was face down on the thick red carpet, his gold pajama bottoms still on, his body already showing signs of rigor mortis. She called for help, and within minutes, Graceland descended into chaos. Elvis's road manager Joe Esposito and his personal aide Al Strada tried to revive him. An ambulance was called, and Elvis was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. The doctors at Baptist Memorial worked on Elvis for approximately 30 minutes, attempting CPR, administering medications, and doing everything medically possible to restart his heart. But it was too late. Elvis Aaron Presley was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. Central Time. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, essentially a fatal heart rhythm abnormality. But the autopsy, conducted by Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner, revealed a body ravaged by years of prescription drug abuse. Elvis had significant levels of codeine, Valium, morphine, and several other medications in his system. His colon was impacted and distended, a condition that had likely caused him significant pain for months. His liver showed signs of damage, and his heart was enlarged, a condition called cardiomegaly that is often associated with long-term drug use. Dr. Francisco ruled the death natural, attributing it to heart disease rather than drug overdose. That decision has been controversial ever since. Medical experts who have reviewed the autopsy findings argue that the massive quantities of drugs in Elvis's system were the primary cause of death, and that calling it natural was a way to protect Elvis's reputation and avoid legal problems for the doctors who had been prescribing him those medications for years. The funeral was held on August 18th, just 2 days after Elvis's death. It was a media circus. Thousands of fans lined the streets outside Graceland, many of them weeping openly. Television crews from around the world broadcast live coverage. And inside Graceland, a private service was held for family and close friends before Elvis's body was taken to Forest Hill Cemetery for burial. But conspiracy theorists point to anomalies in that story that have never been adequately explained. The misspelling of Elvis's middle name on his tombstone is one. Elvis's birth certificate lists his middle name as Aaron, a spelling his parents chose to match his stillborn twin brother, Jesse Garon. But the original tombstone at Forest Hill Cemetery read Aaron, the traditional spelling. The mistake was later corrected, but believers in the faked death theory argue that the error suggests the tombstone was created hastily without proper verification, possibly because the person buried beneath it was not actually Elvis. The behavior of Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, at the funeral has also raised questions. Multiple witnesses claim that Vernon looked at the body in the casket and said it did not look like his son. Some accounts quote Vernon as saying the person in the casket was too pale, too waxy, too different from how Elvis had looked even in death. Believers argue that Vernon knew the truth, that the body in the casket was not Elvis, and that his reaction was genuine shock at seeing the deception carried out. There are also reports from funeral home workers who claimed the body did not look right. One mortician allegedly said the corpse was too heavy, that it felt wrong when they were preparing it for burial. Another claimed that certain physical characteristics did not match Elvis's known features, though these accounts have been disputed and cannot be independently verified. The speed of the burial itself raises questions. Elvis died on August 16th and was buried on August 18th, less than 48 hours later. While rapid burial is not uncommon in cases where the deceased is a public figure and the family wants to avoid prolonged media attention, it does limit the opportunity for close examination of the body. Family members who were not immediately present at Graceland had little time to travel to Memphis and view the body before burial. And then there is the strange case of the casket. Elvis was buried in a 900-pound copper casket that was sealed and placed inside a concrete vault. The weight of the casket alone has fueled speculation that it might have contained something other than a human body. Believers point to the fact that Elvis's body, even accounting for his weight at the time of death, would not require such a heavy casket. They suggest that the casket might have been weighted to make it feel as though a body was inside, while Elvis himself disappeared to start a new life. Bob Joyce has never explicitly endorsed any of these theories. He has never said that Elvis faked his death. He has never claimed to have insider knowledge about what really happened at Graceland. But he has begun speaking more openly about the idea that powerful people often control narratives, that official stories sometimes leave out inconvenient truths, and that the public does not always get the full picture of what happens to famous figures when they die. In a recent video that was recorded during a church service and later posted online, Bob addressed the rumors directly for the first time in years. He said that people have told him never to talk about certain things, never to confirm or deny certain theories, and never to engage with the speculation about his identity. He said those warnings came from people who were concerned about protecting reputations, avoiding lawsuits, and maintaining the careful balance that keeps certain stories buried. But then, Bob said something that caught everyone's attention. He said that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long people try to suppress it. He said that he believes Elvis Presley's story did not end the way the headlines claimed, and that there are people who know exactly what happened but have chosen to stay silent out of fear, loyalty, or legal obligation. He did not say he was Elvis. He did not claim to have evidence that Elvis faked his death, but he spoke with the kind of certainty and specificity that made people wonder how much he actually knows. The idea that Elvis might have had help faking his death is not as far-fetched as it might sound. Elvis had resources, connections, and a network of people who were fiercely loyal to him. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, had access to medical records and documentation that could have been manipulated. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had a history of bending rules and controlling information. And members of the Memphis Mafia had proven over the years that they would do almost anything to protect Elvis. If Elvis had wanted to disappear, he would have needed a new identity, a place to go where no one would recognize him, and a story, convincing enough to explain why he was starting over. Bob Joyce's life fits that profile almost too perfectly. A quiet existence in rural Arkansas, a focus on faith and ministry that would explain why he never sought fame or fortune, and a voice and appearance that were just similar enough to Elvis to raise questions, but not so identical that anyone would immediately make the connection without prompting. The biggest obstacle to the theory is documentation. Bob Joyce has a documented history that predates Elvis's death. There are records of his birth in 1953, photographs of him as a young man, and people who knew him before Elvis allegedly died. Believers argue that those records could have been fabricated, or that Bob Joyce the pastor is not the same person as Bob Joyce the birth certificate, but that requires a level of conspiracy and coordination that becomes harder to sustain under scrutiny. The truth, as is often the case with conspiracy theories, probably lies somewhere between the extreme positions. Bob Joyce is almost certainly not Elvis Presley living under a new identity. The logistical challenges, the number of people who would need to be involved, and the lack of any credible evidence make that scenario highly unlikely. But it is entirely possible that Bob Joyce knows more about Elvis's final days than he has said publicly. He may have connections to people who were close to Elvis. He may have heard stories that were never meant to leave private conversations, and he may be using his platform to hint at truths that he cannot or will not state outright. At 71 years old, Bob Joyce is at an age where legacy starts to matter more than secrecy. If he does know something about Elvis that the world has not heard, now would be the time to speak. And his recent willingness to address the topic, even in vague and carefully worded ways, suggests that he may be preparing to say more. The phrase, "they said never revealed this," carries weight because it implies that someone, somewhere, told Bob to stay quiet. Whether that someone was a friend, a family member, a legal advisor, or someone connected to the Presley estate, the fact that Bob is now speaking suggests he has decided the time for silence is over. In his most recent statements, Bob has framed the mystery not as a question of whether Elvis is alive, but as a question of whether people are willing to accept that official narratives are sometimes incomplete. He has suggested that the Presley family, the estate managers, and others with financial and legal interests in maintaining the official story have reasons to keep certain details private. And he has hinted that those details might change the way people think about Elvis's final years, his state of mind, and the choices he made. Bob has also spoken about redemption in ways that feel personal. He talks about how everyone deserves a second chance, how fame and fortune are not worth sacrificing your soul, and how sometimes the greatest act of courage is walking away from everything the world values to find peace and purpose. Whether he is speaking about Elvis, about himself, or about some combination of the two remains unclear. The conspiracy theory surrounding Bob Joyce and Elvis Presley is not going away. As long as Bob continues to sound like Elvis, look like Elvis, and speak in ways that keep the mystery alive, people will believe. And as long as there are unanswered questions about Elvis's death, inconsistencies in the official record, and people who claim to know more than they are saying, the theory will have fuel. But maybe the truth is not as important as what the theory represents. The idea that Elvis could have walked away from fame, that he could have chosen a quiet life of service over the chaos of celebrity, appeals to something deep in the human psyche. We want to believe that legends can escape their own myths, that people can change, and that second chances are possible even for those who seem trapped by their own success. Bob Joyce, whether he is Elvis Presley or just a man who sounds like him, has become a symbol of that possibility. He represents the hope that there is more to the story, that the official narrative does not capture the full truth, and that sometimes the greatest secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. As Bob himself has said, they told him never to reveal this. But truth has a way of surfacing. And whether Bob Joyce is the keeper of Elvis's greatest secret, or simply a devoted fan who happens to share his voice, the story he is telling, in sermons and songs and carefully chosen words, is one that millions of people want to believe.
Holding to all the countries all over the world via satellite, it's very difficult to comprehend. A live concert, to me, is exciting.
For decades, Elvis Presley fans believed the family tree was closed. Lisa Marie Presley had 4 children, and after Benjamin Keough's tragic death in 2020, the world thought they knew every branch of the Presley bloodline. Then a man named Chewy Thompson appeared on TikTok, and everything changed. People started noticing things. The jawline, the eyes, the way he carried himself. Comments flooded in saying he looked exactly like a young Elvis. And the resemblance was so uncanny that conspiracy theories exploded across social media. But here is what most people do not know. Chewy never claimed to be Elvis's grandson. He never posted videos saying he was part of the Presley family. Other people made that connection, and once they did, the story took on a life of its own. According to sources close to the situation, Chewy was eventually forced by federal authorities to submit to DNA testing, and when the results came back, they allegedly showed a biological connection to the Presley bloodline. Priscilla Presley reportedly responded with fury, threatening legal action if Chewy continued using any association with the Presley name. The case became a battle between DNA evidence and family legacy, between science and silence, and between a man who never asked for the attention and a fan base desperate to believe that Elvis still had secrets left to reveal. So who is Chewy Thompson? What do the DNA results actually show? And why has the mystery of Elvis's potential grandson finally been solved in a way that changes everything we thought we knew about the King's family? Elvis Aaron Presley died on August 16, 1977, at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, leaving behind a daughter, Lisa Marie, who was just 9 years old at the time. The circumstances of his death were tragic and sudden. He was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor by his girlfriend Ginger Alden, and despite attempts to revive him, he was pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital later that afternoon. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, though the cocktail of prescription medications found in his system told a darker story about the final years of the King of Rock and Roll. Elvis's death marked the end of an era, and for millions of fans, it felt like a wound that would never fully heal. The outpouring of grief was unprecedented. Thousands of mourners lined the streets of Memphis for his funeral. Radio stations played his music non-stop. And Graceland, the mansion he had purchased in 1957, became a pilgrimage site almost immediately. But beneath the public mourning was a private tragedy. Lisa Marie had lost her father. Priscilla had lost her ex-husband and the father of her only child. And the Presley family had to figure out how to move forward without the man who had been the center of everything. Life moved forward because it had to. Lisa Marie grew up in the spotlight, splitting her time between Priscilla's home in Los Angeles and visits to Graceland in Memphis. She was thrust into a world of wealth and fame that she never asked for, carrying the weight of being Elvis Presley's daughter everywhere she went. People stared. They asked questions. They expected her to be like her father, to have his talent, his charisma, his magic. And that pressure followed her into adulthood. Lisa Marie married multiple times, each relationship scrutinized by the media and the public. Her first marriage to musician Danny Keough produced 2 children. Riley Keough, born in 1989, would eventually become a successful actress, appearing in films like Mad Max, Fury Road, and The Devil All the Time. Benjamin Keough, born in 1992, bore such a striking resemblance to his grandfather that people often did double takes when they saw him. He had Elvis's eyes, his jawline, his presence, and that resemblance, which should have been a gift, became something heavier. Benjamin struggled with the weight of being Elvis's grandson, and in July 2020, he died by suicide at the age of 27. The loss devastated Lisa Marie and sent shockwaves through the Elvis fan community. Lisa Marie's later marriages, including a brief union with Michael Jackson and another with actor Nicolas Cage, kept her in the tabloid headlines. Her fourth marriage to Michael Lockwood produced twin daughters, Harper and Finley, born in 2008. These girls, along with Riley, represented the continuation of Elvis's bloodline, the living connection to a man who had died decades before they were born. For years, this was the complete picture that the public had access to. The Presley family was well documented, carefully managed by Priscilla and a team of lawyers and business managers who understood the value of Elvis's legacy. Every detail of his life had been analyzed by biographers who published hundreds of books about the king. Every relationship had been examined, every affair dissected, every timeline scrutinized by historians and fans who dedicated their lives to understanding Elvis Presley. The idea that there could be unknown descendants seemed impossible, almost laughable. Elvis's movements were tracked, his affairs were documented. His time was accounted for in ways that few public figures can claim. For years, this was the complete picture. The Presley family was well documented, carefully managed, and fiercely protective of Elvis's legacy. Every detail of his life had been analyzed, every relationship examined, every timeline scrutinized. The idea that there could be unknown descendants seemed impossible. Elvis's affairs and relationships were public knowledge. His time was accounted for. His whereabouts were tracked by fans, journalists, and biographers who had spent decades piecing together every moment of his life. But the internet has a way of surfacing stories that official narratives miss. Social media has democratized investigation in ways that traditional journalism never could. Anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection can dig into public records, compare photographs, analyze timelines, and share theories with thousands of people instantly. And sometime around 2021, a TikTok account belonging to a man named Chewy Thompson started attracting attention that would spiral into one of the most fascinating Elvis-related controversies in decades. At first, his videos were unremarkable, just a guy posting content like millions of others. Lip-syncing videos, comedy sketches, slice-of-life moments. Nothing suggested that Chewy was trying to present himself as anyone special or connected to anyone famous. But then people started commenting. They said he looked like Elvis, not just a passing resemblance, but a deep genetic similarity that was hard to ignore. The kind of resemblance that makes you stop scrolling and look twice. The comments multiplied rapidly. Fans began comparing photos of Chewy side by side with images of young Elvis from the 1950s, pointing out the shape of his face, the curve of his lip, the way his eyes sat in his skull, the arch of his eyebrows. Some people dismissed it as wishful thinking, the kind of pattern recognition that happens when you want to see something badly enough. The human brain is wired to find faces and connections, and Elvis fans have been seeing the king in random strangers for decades. But others were convinced. They analyzed his features frame by frame, looking for evidence that could not be explained away by coincidence. Screenshots of Chewy's videos started circulating on Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. Elvis fan groups, some with memberships in the tens of thousands, began dedicated threads analyzing the resemblance. People pulled up old photographs of Elvis at various ages and created comparison collages. The similarities were striking enough that even skeptics had to admit there was something there, even if they were not ready to jump to conclusions about what it meant. Amateur genealogists got involved, trying to piece together Chewy's family history from whatever public information they could find. They searched marriage records, birth certificates, census data, anything that might provide clues about his ancestry. Some claimed to have found connections to Memphis, to the music industry, to circles where Elvis's relatives or associates had moved. Others reported dead ends, sealed records, and gaps in the documentation that only fueled more speculation. Chewy himself, according to people who followed his account closely, did not encourage the speculation. He did not post videos claiming to be Elvis's grandson. He did not reference the Presley family in his content. He did not try to capitalize on the attention in obvious ways. But the internet does not need permission to build a narrative. And the story took on momentum regardless of what Chewy wanted or believed. Family stories started to surface. People claiming to know Chewy or to know people who knew him began sharing fragments of information online. There were whispers about his mother, about a relationship she allegedly had in the 1980s or 90s, about family secrets that were never supposed to be spoken aloud. Some accounts suggested that Chewy had grown up hearing hints that his biological grandfather was someone famous, someone his mother could not or would not name outright. Other stories claimed that his mother had connections to Memphis, to the music industry, to circles where Elvis's relatives or associates moved even after the king's death. The exact details remain unclear, and much of what circulated online was speculation built on top of rumor. But what is clear is that Chewy Thompson became the focus of an online investigation conducted by thousands of amateur genealogists, Elvis historians, and conspiracy theorists who believed they were on the verge of uncovering a hidden chapter of Presley family history. And then, according to multiple sources who claim to be close to the situation, the federal government got involved. The claim is that Chewy was contacted by federal authorities and told he needed to submit to DNA testing. This is where the story takes a turn that raises serious questions about how and why this became a matter for government agencies rather than remaining a private family dispute or an internet curiosity. The reasons for federal involvement have never been fully explained, and the lack of transparency around this part of the story has fueled even more speculation. Was it related to potential estate claims? The Presley estate is valued at over $500 million, and any legitimate heir could potentially challenge the existing distribution of assets. Was it about trademark disputes over the Presley name? The estate has fought numerous legal battles over the years to protect Elvis's image and brand from unauthorized use? Was it about concerns over fraud or identity theft, particularly if Chewy or anyone associated with him had been using the Presley connection in ways that could constitute a crime? Or was there something else entirely, some aspect of the case that has not been made public? The exact motivation remains murky, but the outcome was clear. Chewy reportedly agreed to the DNA test, either voluntarily or under some form of legal pressure that left him with little choice. The testing process itself would have been more rigorous than the standard ancestry kits that people order online. This would have been a forensic-level analysis, the kind used in legal proceedings and criminal investigations, with chain-of-custody documentation and results that could be submitted as evidence in court. DNA testing for genealogical purposes has become common in recent years, with companies like Ancestry and 23andMe offering affordable kits that can trace ancestry back multiple generations and identify genetic relatives across the globe. Millions of people have used these services to discover family connections they never knew existed, to find biological parents or siblings, and to map their ethnic heritage. But this was different. This was allegedly a test conducted under federal supervision, with results that would carry legal weight rather than just satisfying personal curiosity. The process would have involved collecting samples, likely cheek swabs, under controlled conditions. The samples would have been sent to a certified laboratory where technicians would analyze specific markers in Chewy's DNA and compare them against known genetic profiles from the Presley family. If the Presley family cooperated with the testing, which is unclear, reference samples could have come from Lisa Marie's children or other confirmed relatives. If they did not cooperate, the testing would have relied on existing genetic databases or samples from other sources. When the results came back, they reportedly showed a connection to the Presley bloodline, not a direct parent-child relationship with Elvis himself, which would be biologically impossible given the timeline and the fact that Elvis died in 1977, but a genetic link that placed Chewy within the extended Presley family tree. For people who believed the online theories, this was confirmation. This was proof that the resemblance was not coincidence, that there was a real biological connection, and that Chewy Thompson belonged to the Presley family, whether or not anyone wanted to acknowledge it publicly. For skeptics, the DNA results raised more questions than they answered. What kind of connection exactly? How many generations removed? Through which branch of the family tree? Was it a close connection that would make him a direct descendant of Elvis's siblings or parents? Or was it a more distant relationship that could be traced back several generations to a common ancestor? And, most importantly, did the connection actually support the claim that Chewy was Elvis's grandson, or did it just mean he was related to the broader Presley family in a way that had nothing to do with the king himself? Genetic connections can mean many things. The Presley family, like any family, has branches that extend beyond the immediate household. Elvis had siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles whose descendants are living today. A DNA match to the Presley bloodline does not automatically mean a direct connection to Elvis himself, and that distinction is important. But for fans who had been following the story, the nuance did not matter as much as the headline. Chewy Thompson was genetically connected to the Presleys, and that was enough. The response from the Presley family, specifically from Priscilla Presley, was reportedly swift and severe. According to sources close to the situation, Priscilla was furious when she learned about the DNA results and the online attention surrounding Chewy. She allegedly contacted her legal team immediately and began preparing to take action against any attempt by Chewy to publicly associate himself with the Presley name, or to claim any rights related to Elvis's legacy. The legal threats that followed were serious. Priscilla reportedly made it clear through her attorneys that any attempt by Chewy to use the Presley name for commercial purposes, to claim inheritance rights to any portion of the estate, or to publicly associate himself with Elvis's legacy in ways that could be seen as official or sanctioned would be met with immediate lawsuits. The message was unmistakable. DNA results or not, the Presley family was not going to acknowledge Chewy Thompson as part of their inner circle, and they would use every legal tool available to protect the brand and the estate from what they saw as an interloper. Understanding Priscilla's reaction requires understanding what is at stake. The Presley estate is not just sentimentally valuable. It is a massive business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Graceland alone attracts over 500,000 visitors every year, generating tens of millions in revenue from ticket sales, merchandise, and licensing deals. Elvis's music continues to sell. His image appears on products ranging from T-shirts to slot machines. His likeness is licensed for commercials, movies, and television shows. And all of that is controlled by the estate, which was managed by Priscilla for decades before being placed in a trust for Lisa Marie and her children. Protecting that legacy is not just about sentiment or family pride. It is about business, about legal rights, and about ensuring that the Presley name maintains its value in the marketplace. Every person who claims to be related to Elvis, whether legitimately or not, represents a potential threat to the brand. If the estate allows one person to use the Presley connection without challenge, it sets a precedent that could open the floodgates to dozens or hundreds of other claims. And even if most of those claims are false, fighting them in court is expensive, time-consuming, and damaging to the carefully maintained image of the Presley family. Priscilla has spent decades guarding Elvis's memory. She has overseen Graceland, turning it from a private home into a museum and tourist destination that preserves Elvis's legacy for future generations. She has managed his estate through legal battles, business deals, and family conflicts that have played out in public and in private. She has fought to protect his image from exploitation, from unauthorized biographies, from products and projects that she felt cheapened his memory. So her reaction to Chewy Thompson, whether or not he personally claimed to be Elvis's grandson, makes sense from a protective standpoint. She has seen people try to attach themselves to Elvis for money, for fame, for attention. She has dealt with con artists, opportunists, and delusional fans who believed they had special connections to the king. And she is not willing to let that happen without a fight, especially not when the person in question has DNA results that might give their claim more credibility than the usual conspiracy theories. The online community, already invested in the story, exploded into debate when news of the DNA results and Priscilla's response became public. Elvis fan groups and social media platforms became battlegrounds where people argued passionately about what the evidence meant. Some people defended Chewy fiercely, arguing that if the DNA evidence showed a biological connection to the Presley bloodline, then he deserved recognition regardless of how Priscilla felt. They pointed to the resemblance, to the genetic data, and to the possibility that there were relationships within the Presley family that had been kept quiet for decades. These defenders also argued that Chewy had done nothing wrong. He had not gone on television, claiming to be Elvis's grandson. He had not hired publicists or written a book. He had not tried to claim a portion of the estate. He had simply existed, posted videos like millions of others, and become the subject of speculation he never encouraged. If anything, they argued, he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Others took the opposite position, accusing Chewy of exploiting his resemblance for social media clout. They argued that even if he did not explicitly claim to be Elvis's grandson, he benefited from the speculation and did nothing to shut it down. His silence, they claimed, was consent to the narrative others were building around him. Critics also pointed out that a genetic connection to the broader Presley family did not mean he was Elvis's grandson, and that allowing him to claim that title dishonored Lisa Marie's children, who were the real grandchildren of the king. Riley Keough had built a career while carrying the weight of being Elvis's granddaughter, and Benjamin Keough had struggled his entire life with looking like Elvis before his tragic death in 2020. The debate also touched on larger questions about celebrity and family. Is family defined by DNA or by the relationships you build? If Chewy is genetically connected but was not raised by the Presleys and was not acknowledged by them, is he really part of the family? And who gets to decide? But the most interesting part of this entire story is what Chewy himself did not do. He did not go on talk shows claiming to be Elvis's heir. He did not sell his story to tabloids. He did not write a book or launch a merchandise line. He just kept living his life, posting occasional content on TikTok and letting other people debate the truth of his bloodline. That restraint, intentional or not, is what makes the mystery so compelling. If Chewy were a con artist or a clout chaser, he would have capitalized on the attention in every way possible. He would have milked the controversy, played up the resemblance, and built a brand around being Elvis's secret grandson. But he did not. And that silence makes people wonder if maybe there is more to the story than anyone wants to admit publicly. The question of whether Chewy Thompson is Elvis Presley's biological grandson depends on how you define that relationship. If you are asking whether Elvis fathered a child who then had Chewy, the timeline does not support it. Elvis died in 1977. For Chewy to be his grandson, Elvis would have needed a child, likely in secret, who then had Chewy in the 1980s or later. While not impossible, there is no credible evidence that Elvis had any children other than Lisa Marie. But if you are asking whether Chewy is genetically connected to the Presley family, the DNA results reportedly say yes. And that is where the mystery gets complicated. Genetic connections can trace through siblings, cousins, and distant relatives. Elvis's family tree includes people whose lives were not lived in the spotlight. The phrase, officially the grandson of Elvis Presley, if you look at the data, is both true and misleading, depending on what data you examine. Officially, Lisa Marie Presley's children are Elvis's only recognized grandchildren. Legally, they are the heirs to his estate and legacy. But genetically, if Chewy's DNA shows a connection to the Presley bloodline, then he is part of that family in some capacity. The reason this story resonates so deeply with Elvis fans is not really about Chewy Thompson. It is about the enduring hope that legends like Elvis still have secrets left to reveal. For decades, fans have clung to stories about Elvis sightings, hidden recordings, and unknown relationships. They want to believe that the man they loved was more complex and mysterious than the sanitized version of his life. Chewy represents that fantasy. He is the possibility that there is still more to discover, that the Presley family tree has unexpected branches, and that Elvis's legacy is not as neatly packaged as the estate would prefer. Whether Chewy is actually Elvis's grandson in the way people want him to be is almost beside the point. The mystery is finally solved, but not in the way people expected. Chewy Thompson is not a fraud. He is not a con artist. He is not some random guy pretending to be related to Elvis for views. According to the data, he is genetically connected to the Presley family. That much seems clear. But what that connection means, how it happened, and whether it makes him Elvis's grandson in any meaningful sense is still a matter of interpretation. The Presley family has not publicly acknowledged him. Priscilla has reportedly threatened legal action to keep him from using the family name. And the media has largely treated the story as an internet curiosity rather than a serious genealogical discovery. But the people who believe, who have studied the photos and the timelines and the DNA results, are convinced that Chewy Thompson is part of Elvis's legacy, whether the estate wants to admit it or not. And maybe that is the real lesson of this story. That family is not just about legal documents and estate battles. It is about blood, about resemblance, about the connections that exist, whether or not anyone wants to acknowledge them. Chewy Thompson did not ask to look like Elvis. He did not ask for the attention or the speculation. But the internet saw something in his face that reminded them of the king, and once that connection was made, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. As it stands today, Chewy Thompson is officially the grandson of Elvis Presley, if you look at the genetic data and accept that family connections can be more complicated than official narratives suggest. He is not recognized by the Presley estate, he is not included in the will or the trust, but he carries DNA that links him to one of the most famous families in American history. And that is a truth that no legal threat or public denial can erase. What do you think this story really means? Is Chewy Thompson the secret grandson of Elvis Presley, or is he just a distant relative whose resemblance sparked a conspiracy theory that got out of control? Let us know your thoughts, and if this mystery changed the way you think about Elvis's legacy, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from the world of rock and roll royalty.